Could I start by welcoming you all to the Faculty of Education here in Cambridge. It's so wonderful to see you, having come from all over Europe, all over the world, to come and spend this time together thinking about possibilities. How cool is that, actually? The Possibilities Studies Network. That's the kind of club I'd like to belong to, actually. I'm going to be talking today about possibilities surrounding education and our idea of schools more specifically. And I'm going to be sharing with you my ideas about why I think that our systems of education throughout the world are fundamentally broken, and why we need to think very differently about what it is to educate. I'm going to be doing this in multimodal ways, including through the use of poetry. I'll be encouraging you to talk to your neighbours. I'm hoping we'll have some dialogue towards the end. And I'll be using images. So this should be an embodied experience, because part of what it is that I'm arguing for is that education needs to take account of us as embodied beings with gender and ethnicity and hormones and genes and all the things that radically alters how we see the world. Not only from person to person, but from moment to moment. And yet we think about knowledge and truth as somehow existing outside of time and space, as somehow universal and abstract. And I really want to ground us as we start to think about education. I am going to be talking about upsetting topics like self-harm and suicide attempts amongst the young, just to warn you about that. I don't think we can seriously talk about everything that's wrong in education without taking a very long, hard look at that. So just to start, I'm going to show you a picture. And I'd like to encourage you to talk with the person sitting next to you about what does that picture evoke for you? What do you think about when you see that picture? Just 1 minute. Thank you. Okay. I can see the teachers in the room. Okay, that's the visual. Let's come back together sign. We don't have time to discuss this, and I want to move on. But yeah, interesting times, huh? And yet it wasn't that long ago. What comes up for me when I see this picture is the way that nature very quickly reclaimed our urban spaces. And it makes me reflect on the fact that we keep nature at bay. And I wonder how long it will be before nature reclaims our spaces. So, sticking then with the topic of rewilding education, I'd like to start with a poem that will say, I hope, in a few words, what it will take me the rest of this lecture to unpack. It's a poem called My Child. My child is a star. An A star. Yours is a B. Not your fault, of course, but a B nonetheless. We had to move, got inheritance early. Houses in this catchment are not cheap. You stayed in your social housing. Your local school underwhelms. Your child languishes in mixed classes, chatting in corridors, learning maths from a teacher of PE. My child circulates on the left, in silence, tough love, buttoned up. Graduate teachers will see her right. She knows Shakespeare and kings. We work hard, sacrifice to give her a future. We have earned her privilege. She knows. Your hard work, bone tired after shifts, is hardly the same. My child is destined for gap year greatness. Her work with the poor in Bangladesh will touch their lives in ways that Oxbridge admissions tutors can't fail to notice. Your child knows poverty from the inside. Perhaps it is your fault? Who will your child blame when working shifts to pay for uni becomes their permanent? The golden ticket does not come cheap. My child has her golden ticket for the future. What more could she want? My child is curled in a ball. They think they can save her. It turns out she doesn't know how to be. So I think what I'm saying in that poem is that education is a driver of inequality, that the grades that you get depend more on the wealth of your parents than on any other factor, and that it's not even working for the wealthy, the global elites. There's a collective madness when we think about education and schooling, and I wonder what that's actually all about. So I like the metaphor of rewilding for thinking about how we might improve education. And I think that's for two reasons. One is that we genuinely need to rewild the planet. We need to respond to the climate emergency. And education is not even beginning to do that work. But also, I love it as a metaphor. So it's the practice of returning areas of land to a wild state, including the reintroduction of animal species that are no longer naturally found there. And I'd like to think we can return education to its natural state, from before modernity and the industrial era, back to a time where learning happened as part of a village. You know, the phrase, it takes a village to educate a child. How can we rescue some of that good practice of education? Rewilding is a new and progressive approach to conservation that doesn't reify a particular moment in history. It actually goes back to the harms that humans have done to the planet since the start of the Holocene. It's both blends radical scientific insights with practical innovations, which I think has to be the future of education. It's about reviving ecological processes. It's not about imposing an idea of what should happen across the entire planet. And it's about restoring lost interactions, which I feel in classrooms around the world have been lost. So, what's the problem that we're trying to address? So, we face Significant and growing global inequality and depletion of the Earth's resources. We face omni-crises, so the climate emergency, the negative impact of some aspects of AI or the ways in which it will be appropriated, geopolitics, pandemics, rapid population decline from about 2050. Schools are modelled on the prison, on the army, and on the factory. A 20th century idea of what it is to educate. And violent cultures of schooling, both direct violence and indirect violence, are at worst driving, but at best exacerbating or failing to address inequality, ill health, democratic deficit, social division, hatred of the other. I don't want to spend too long on really depressing statistics. I'll share this PowerPoint later so that you can delve into this perhaps in a little bit more detail. But let's just look at the top one here. So the richest 10% of the global population earn 52% of income in the world and account for 48% of carbon emissions. And the poorest half of the global population get 8.5% of all income. I don't think trickle-down is working. Gender equality that many would say we are achieving. Between 2015 and 2020, women earned 34.4% of global income, just up from 30% in 1990. And shocking numbers of children living in poverty, both in the UK and globally. But education's going to lift them all out of poverty, right? Universal primary education, a good thing. Universal secondary education, get them into school. Get them into school. The gap between the richest parts of society and the poorest parts of society are stubbornly resistant to change. And I would argue that education exacerbates the problem. It's a driver of inequality rather than the opposite. And it does it through myths such as the myth of meritocracy, the idea that the brightest and the best through grammar schools or whatever other iteration of education and schooling will enable the exam system to pick out the brightest. It doesn't work. The attainment gap between the richest and poorest children grows wider at every stage of education. More than doubling. More than doubling by the end of primary, and then doubling again by the end of secondary school. Schools are not reducing the gap. If you take free school meals, or if you're entitled to free school meals in the UK, you're 4 times more likely to be excluded in 2021. If you have special educational needs and disabilities, you are 6 times more likely to be excluded from school. You're expensive to educate. You don't make the school look good. When we look at the highest performing state secondary schools, they take half the number of disadvantaged pupils compared to average schools, and the houses in the catchment area are 20% more expensive. It's not because they're academies. It's not because there's competition between schooling. It's not because they've been forced to compete to drive up standards. It's because they're only serving a narrow section of the population. And they're not overtly using selection criteria. They're doing it through the back door. within education, there's another myth and driver, which is we need constant improvement. So those of you who have been teachers or who've been involved in education, schools and universities actually, will know that you're always being required to improve. And it goes down to the level of the pupil. You're on level 4, great, come on, where's your plan? You need to get to level 5. You're at level 5, you're not at level 5 in maths, come on, keep going, keep pushing. Teachers, you're getting 20% of your kids to this level, right, 25%. Your pay depends on it. Your promotion depends on it. Keep pushing. This creates a feeling of dissatisfaction, a feeling that you can never quite rest. And that feeds into a consumerist mindset, that we're never quite happy with what we've got. We need to buy this latest product in order to finally achieve our heart's desires. And it starts in schools, and it feeds into our political systems. You don't like the other lot? We've got, bingo, the product. Vote for us. You'll get your heart's desires. Don't rest with what you've got. Keep pushing for the next stage. Collective madness. Part of our collective madness more generally is we treat irreplaceable natural and social capital as income. So you get companies, you get individuals who make billions out of our air, our water, our roads, our fish. And yet the myth of permanent growth is that they're entitled. They've worked hard. They get to keep it. Global trade and competition, the shipping of products around the world, leads to protectionism. Shipping that generates carbon, pipelines that lead to militarization and threat, accumulation of weapons. Permanent growth, agro-business, maltreating animals, maintaining monocultures with pesticides and artificial fertilizer. Our human activity is filling the biosphere with carbon dioxide and the oceans with plastic. We've already rendered the planet uninhabitable for other species, many other species. And ultimately, if we carry on as we are, we will render it uninhabitable for humans. And our school curricula are promoting an unsustainable mindset. We overvalue abstraction. We undervalue applied knowledge, learning through doing, kinesthetic ways of knowing. We're teaching a metaphysics of mastery. Yeah, there's problems, but a boffin will just come and they'll be so clever that they'll find the perfect technical solution. Don't worry, just keep studying, just keep doing well at school. We'll be fine. And we're normalizing catastrophe. Okay, the last of the doom and gloom before I switch. So, in order to be internationally competitive, of course, we're prioritising English, maths and science, but the losses of PE has led to worsening of fitness and health in the UK, and so many school playing fields have been sold off. In the UK in 2020, by the age of 17, I find this statistic so shocking. Our children, our 17-year-olds in the UK, 10% of females and 4% of males have self-harmed with suicidal intent. What are we doing? What are we doing to our children? The fourth leading cause of death among 15 to 19-year-olds worldwide is suicide. Okay. Rewilding. Rewilding. This is a quote from Robert Macfarlane, who's based here in Cambridge, actually. We're fallen in mostly broken pieces, I thought, but the wild can still return us to ourselves. So this picture here is the woods where I used to play as a child. And I went back recently and took that picture. I'm so grateful to that space that was on the edge of Birmingham in the UK, an urban area, but it happened to have these beautiful woods where we could play. And I think a lot of the lessons of life I learned in those woods, where nature was my teacher. And I still have an absolute love affair with trees. So I'm going to share with you my second poem, which is about how we can be in harmony with the cycles of trees. The tree sucks water through roots and branches, releasing vapours into air before rain. The tree grows leaves, greening up towards sun and reddening and falling before regrowth. The tree inhales carbon. I've realised I need to show you the picture. The tree enables carbon, exhales oxygen. And I inhale oxygen, exhale carbon. Trachea and bronchi mirror branches and twigs. We dance our dance of life. The tree and I find peace in dancing. Stillness at the heart of cycling. Days, seasons and years, dropping ego like leaves to earth, raising joy like vapour to sky, sustaining life like oxygen to air, knowing all without knowing. There is only now. So, I'd like to argue we go from modern systems of education to postmodern ecosystems that support diverse opportunities for learning and teachers. From school as factory, prison and army to school as wild garden. From neoliberal, marketised systems of schooling to systems grounded in Kumar's soil, soul society. And you may well recognise a lot of Schumacher in my presentation today. From an economic view of education to a holistic view of education as sacred practice, however you understand that word. And from permanent growth and constant school improvement to degrowth and sustainable schools. So we need to ask ourselves, how do we protect the planet and other species? How do we put right the harm that's been done to our planet? And how do we build sustainable ecosystems in our education settings and beyond? How do we allow our love of life, our sense of awe, wonder and interconnectedness to drive all that we are and all that we do? So I'm just going to give a few snapshots in the final 3 or 4 slides, and then I'm looking forward to some conversation. So in my work on peace, I take international peace theory from a scholar called Johan Galtung, who was the first professor of peace studies in Norway, and apply it to education. And he argues that if we want to achieve negative peace, we tackle direct violence, and we do that through peacekeeping. But it will only ever be negative peace. And our proliferation of rules and CCTV and our locks and our fences are peacekeeping that proliferate within our schools. If we want to move to positive peace, where we're tackling indirect violence, structural violence, cultural violence, we need to work through peacemaking and peace building. So I'm arguing we need to take our schools from negative peace and peacekeeping into positive peace. And if you'd like to know more about this, I'm working with schools in Kazakhstan at the moment to do this, and it's brilliant work. Business as usual is not going to get us to where we want to be. We need the moral imagination. Jean-Paul Lederac talks about the moral imagination. We can't achieve the future that we want if we can't imagine it. We need the arts. We need an arts-based mindset in order to think about where it is we want to go. Education as monoculture, 80% of all 11-year-olds need to be able to do this. No, we need to move from that to education as rewilding. Let's discover the unique potential of every child, and let's enable them to discover that through our work with them in a whole variety of settings within and outside of the classroom. We need to move from modernity, truth, humanism, to post-modernity, multiple truths, post-humanism. And from Enlightenment thinking to reconnecting with wisdom traditions around body, mind, heart, and soul. Teaching, learning, and curriculum, from the metaphysics of mastery to nature as teacher. From a Eurocentric curriculum to a decolonized curriculum. From credentializing elites to assessment for learning, which might include micro-credentials, portfolio assessment, even Cambridge assessment, just over the bridge, are starting to realise that the golden standard of the A-level, the ticket, the golden ticket to get you through to your elite opportunities, is starting to wear thin. Employers want to know, what can you do? Have you got the capabilities to do the tasks that I need you to do? And I probably can't offer you a job for life because it's all going to be different in 5 years' time. How can we enable young people to be lifelong learners? And how do we provide the learning opportunities for them to be able to do that? Test and recall. 20th century. Maybe we needed to remember things. Maybe we need to be able to copy neatly. We need an arts-based mindset. And you can be a scientist and have an arts-based mindset. And finally, how do we educate and support our teachers? We need to move away from the idea of a teacher as apprentice to teacher as public intellectual and innovator, retaining a unique role in mentoring and supporting and stimulating and noticing the learning of young people. But it does take a village to educate a child. Could children learn in science laboratories, in care homes, in museums, in parks, in forests? How do we set up learning and capture learning opportunities with teachers still at the heart of doing what they do best? We need to move from consuming research to doing research. Research shouldn't be a big, scary thing that only clever people are allowed to do. All of us should be researching. We should know how to be critical and how to discriminate between different kinds of evidence in order to have assured ourselves that what we're learning is valid. So from experts to communities of practice, from command and control to trust and enable. Schools teach command and control. They teach you that somebody older than you, cleverer than you, more powerful than you, has got your back. All you have to do is follow what they're telling you to do, keep your nose clean, and you'll exit at the other side. The world is not like that anymore, even if it ever was. We need young people who can solve problems, young people who have the confidence to have a go, to learn from mistakes. We need to build a culture of trust. Okay, I could say more, but I'm not going to. This is my email address. The Cambridge Peace Education Research Group is my research group. We have seminars and events here in Cambridge events online several times a term. So do sign up if you would like to join us. And I think we have 10 more minutes for discussion.
Thank you, Hilary. So, another possible is possible. And there is a vision, and there is inspiration, and there are possibilities for the future. You must have many questions. There is a band out there, you've heard them, just what's going on, and there is ice, and there is wine and water, and all sorts of wonderful things. But to actually ask Hilary some questions about the possibilities that may link to you activating some of this in your space, links to what Lord Woolley was saying this morning, which is make it happen by doing. A question, well done. Here is Janelle King asking a question.
Hi.
Well, hello.
Hi.
I'm Janelle, as she mentioned. I am also assuming my first step toward, the professor path in the fall. And what you are describing about rewilding education, you're describing things that I believe deeply in my core. I've experienced in various environments. My question for you is, as someone who is stepping into teaching at a university, what recommendations or guidance would you share to have a pocket of seeds for rewilding in a new environment, where you're at the bottom of the pole?
Okay, thank you.
Beautiful question.
That's a really good question, and I could spend at least half an hour answering this, but I'm just going to pick out a few things. I think first of all, we exist within the system that we exist in, and your students will have paid a lot of money in order to have been inducted into the system so that they too, at some point, will stand a chance of taking the first step on the ladder. So I think we have to get the balance right between doing what we're paid to do, honouring our contracts with the people who are paying our salaries, whilst at the same time starting to trouble and unsettle. I wish that I'd started using arts and poetry in my research a lot sooner. I didn't think that I could. I thought I kept my poetry and my academic world very separate. So I would encourage you to bring in whatever arts or craft or music or whatever other things that you have in your life, and to think about to bring them in. I'd also just encourage you to talk to your students. I've learned so much from my students. There's some sitting here, and so I'm fundamentally different because of what they've taught me, and just talk to them. I think higher education is it's already facing existential crisis. The funding model here in the UK is utterly broken. Globally, it's broken. The problem is we don't believe anymore that if you get a degree that you've got a knowledge that rises you above anybody else. Yes, it does structurally, but the knowledge that you have doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to make a bigger contribution to society. I don't know if I would. Well, both of my children say they probably wouldn't go to university if they had their time over.
So we have another question here, and so 1, 2 for democracy reasons, 3. Thank you. Brent?
Hello.
Oh.
Wow. Sorry. So I love everything, and I am really big on pushing boundaries and making students go into kind of wild situations, right? I'm an ethics teacher, and I really like making people uncomfortable. For me, that's where you're really getting to a spot. It's when you're uncomfortable. But that's the hard part. Yeah. And one thing I notice is your language is extremely positive. So where is all the risk, the vulnerability, the fear, the possibility that in a wild environment you might actually get eaten, and that's okay in a wild environment. You have to accept your fact that you're food, right? And so there is this, there's that sense of it that I also want to bring into that teaching, right? And so part of me worries when we push our words to be positive. So the very last thing you say there, trust.
Yeah. Yeah.
Trust is the key, right?
Yeah.
You have to first be vulnerable.
Yeah.
And as a teacher, I've found I have to first be vulnerable
Yeah.
as an expert in order to convince them that they're also experts.
Yeah.
So one of the things I tell them is you're doing ethics anyway, even if you
Yeah.
don't know you are. The stuff you do has ethical impact. And so you better think about it, right? But that's a scary thing. It's a scary thing to think about that everything you do impacts someone else. So how do you deal with that?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I agree with you, and I don't actually know or expect that any of this will come to be in my lifetime. But what I will say, Robert Nixon has written a brilliant book called Slow Violence. And what he argues is what I feel very deeply, which is we are doing so much harm and violence to young people through obesity, through a lack of agency, through controlling them. So I showed there the woods. We got into big scrapes when we were in the woods. I don't think parents nowadays would be willing to risk their children doing the things that we were allowed to do. And we have to have grown-up conversations about the harm and the damage that we're doing. So we are bringing about reduced life expectancy because of obesity, because of poor mental health. Our children are not thriving. And so my frustration is that whenever there's anything that somebody somewhere can count on a checklist, we say that that's safety. But it's so risky to be treating our young people as we're currently treating them. And, you know, there's, I don't know if you've been following the latest scientific discoveries around fertility. So human sperm count has declined by 50% since 1968. So as a species, we're piled on top of each other and we're destroying our habitat. Let's just think of ourselves as animals here. What happens when a habitat gets exhausted? People start to eat each other, but also you find that fertility levels start to fall through the floor. And so nature knows that we are creating so much harm, and we kind of have to wake up. Of course, there's all of the issues around child safety. So at the moment, we have children behind gates with doors. We have key cards. We DRB every adult that will ever come into contact with them. What I'm talking about requires trust. I mean, we know about the big and high-profile cases, but the elephant in the room is that the majority of harm that's done to children is done in the home and by people they know. It's not done by teachers.
We have another question here, and one here, and one in the front, and none from over there.
Sorry, that's probably me looking over that way.
So
Thank you. I'll be brief. Thank you so much. I'm Sarah Wookie. I am a former dancer, so I loved hearing about embodiment. I'm an affiliate researcher at the Center for Research in the Arts, Social Sciences and Humanities here at Cambridge, the one place I could find some artists. So I guess I'm interested in two things. One, you mentioned embodiment, and I think there's further possibilities to talk about the body and kind of intuition and the senses.
Yeah.
So I'm curious if there's more room for that to kind of dig a bit deeper, and also about the artist-based mindset. I think you touched on it in terms of bringing in, let's say, creative practices, but I wonder if there's more to say to that in terms of what that mindset is. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. So I think I'd like us to be talking, to be using the arts as our paradigm within the humanities. So we talk about social science, and we, in education and in the other social sciences, we kind of think that our aim is to do our clever research so that we reduce it down to 3 recommendations that we can then give to policymakers in order to bring about change. The reason I love the arts-based mindset is because when you're an artist, You interact with your environment. You create something. And the role of your audience, if you like, the role of the people who are in the art gallery or who are listening to the music is to interact with what you've created and to open up so many more questions. So the experience of every person who interacts with a piece of art is unique, and it's empowering, and it's relational. So that's what I would like us to do through education, is for young people to be able to have the time and the space and the capacity to follow their projects through and to end up with so many more questions than answers, and for teachers to be feeding things through so that they do get the knowledge that they need, but it's done at the time that they want it, when they're receptive to it, and it's good and right for them. The reason that I foreground body, mind, heart and soul is our wisdom traditions, whether it's in the global south, in indigenous communities, in the global east, around harmony and balance and intuition and other ways of knowing. We have this fallacy that all the thinking takes place here as if it's some kind of computer. We think with our gut. I mean, literally, we think with our gut, with our spinal column, we think with our body. Our levels of hormones, our blood sugar, whether we've got cortisol running through our system, affects what we see. It affects what we know. And so learning how to manage ourselves as embodied beings in the complex environment we find ourselves in is so important. And we can't do that by thinking of knowledge as somehow abstract.
Final question in the interests of time, Frederica.
Hello, my name is Frederica. I'm from Montreal, and I'm a first-generation Canadian. My parents moved to Montreal in the 70s, and it's really interesting being here and listening to, top-tier academics discuss this idea of deconstructing the structures that people outside of the dominant group have worked so hard to be part of, and who have been told that if you want to excel and do well in life, you have to become part of this and be accepted, and then you will flourish.
Yeah.
So I'm slightly nervous.
Yeah.
So I think maybe my question is, in realizing that there are different narratives and that this structure that has been put together over time may not even serve the people that have designed it, is the answer truly to deconstruct it, or is the answer to maybe look outside of it and invite more diverse perspectives to see how everybody can flourish in what we already have?
Yeah, thank you. That's such a good question. I mean, I think this is why the moral imagination is so important, because we have to be able to envisage what it is. So what I'm currently envisaging is that I think we probably would still need universal primary education up to the age of about 12. But that would be to prepare young people to be lifelong choosers. And then I think we need opportunities through what I'm thinking of as kind of educational hubs, which might be like universities or further education colleges that people could go to. But you might have a 12-year-old sitting next to an 80-year-old, and somebody might decide they want to sit out of education for a while and come back when they're 42 in order to come and engage, because at that point they're ready. And people might have started out in education and then want to come back in their 60s to retrain for a different path that they might want to go down. So that's the kind of model that I'm thinking about. Part of the challenge is we need the people who have the most invested in these structures to move over and to make some space. And that's the hardest thing to do, because why would they? But we have to find ways of persuading people that if we continue with business as usual, in 100 years, there may well not be that many humans at all. And it's all very well to feel that you've grabbed more than your fair share of resources. But even if you have robots and AI, you're still going to need human interactions in order to be able to achieve your goals. So we have to renegotiate the social contract. And for me, the biggest challenge around decolonizing is, okay, so the European canon is gone. We recognize that it's the white male European. It doesn't apply to the entire planet. So if we decolonize, how do we discriminate? And then people say, no, we don't want to discriminate. Okay, another word for that. How do we decide what is quality and what's not quality? Because if we don't discriminate, and if it's everything, we don't need universities or schools or education. It all becomes a big kind of soup. So these are the conversations that we have to have. How do we renegotiate the contracts so that those who have too much make space for those who have nothing? And how do we think differently about beauty, quality, the good life, what it is to thrive, what it is to be human?
Thank you, Hilary Cremin.